Thank you, Mr. President, and I want to thank my great friend, the senator from Maine, who has been so instrumental in achieving compromise in the body, whether it's in the Common Sense Caucus when we were in shutdown, or it is just bridging the gap many, many times in trying to find a path forward for us to legislate in the United States Senate. She truly is a champion in her efforts of trying to make this body work. I want to start out by telling you, as Attorney General, the whole while I was Attorney General for 8 years, very little activity on prostitution. When I was running for office, I still have a lot of friends in law enforcement, and I visited them and said, what's your challenges? And every local sheriff, especially those in Western North Dakota, every city commission, every city chief of police said, we have a growing concern with prostitution. And I started thinking about that. I started thinking about what that meant. And then I started looking behind what those claims of prostitution were. And I started realizing that for very many of these young women, often children, who are in the life of prostitution, that's not by choice. This is some of the most horrific victimization that goes on in America today. The victimization of small children, the dehumanization of small children, the challenge of recovery once they've given an opportunity to find a different path forward, the addiction that comes with it, the grooming that comes with it, the shame that comes with it. And very many people will say, we want to prevent this, but very often we know that the victims of human trafficking come from homes that weren't the healthiest homes. They're runaways, they're homeless youth, and they have no other option for recovering, they have no other option for sustaining their life than being part of this horrific experience. And so, as my great friend from Maine talks about this, we need to do a better job in getting the tools for prosecution, which is the excellent bill that Senator Klobuchar has advanced for promoting safe harbor legislation, which will not only help in a path of recovery, but also will give us an opportunity to encourage more and more of these victims to come forth as witnesses in prosecution. It's very difficult to convince someone who has been told for years and years and years as they've been in the life that if you tell about this victimization, what will happen to you is you will go to jail with me. And so we have to stick together. And so how do you break that cycle of control? You break it by providing opportunity, which these bills do. You break it by preventing, by passing the homeless youth and runaway bill. You break it by focusing a bright light on this problem. And I could not have been prouder of this body as we move towards these series of bills on homeless youth, move forward on these series of bills on trafficking, that this body was speaking for some of the most disenfranchised citizens of our country, those victims of human trafficking. So you can imagine my despair, and I think the despair of a lot of victims groups, the despair of a lot of people in this body when we've reached this impasse. It is important that we say that the goal now is not to rehash what's happened in the past. It's not to rehash the problems and the concerns that everybody's had in the past. Set aside all of that. Set aside all of the rancor that we've heard for the last week and focus on one thing. Focus on a victim who may be watching this. Focus on a victim advocate who may be wanting and needing and desperately seeking the help that we can provide that advocate in providing a secure future for these victims. Let's focus on them. Let's focus on what we can do to bridge this impasse. And so my friend Senator Collins and I think that we've, as she's described it, have advanced a proposal that we believe firmly resolves all the issues, sets forth a path where we can in fact move and listen to the voices that don't get heard very often in places like Washington, D.C. Respond to the concerns, respond to the victimization, be the empathetic body that I know we can be by saying, yes, we can help and we will help. And so we hope that this will at least generate enough discussion, at least provide at least enough of a bridge forward that we can, in fact, continue to have the dialogue, continue to address amendments if we can get through this and actually move this issue forward. And I'm going to yield to my great friend from Maine. I would just like to ask her a question about, as an appropriator, I know there may be some controversy, and you've raised this already. There is some discussion that this may not be an appropriate place to make this decision, and I just would like you to elaborate on the appropriations process.
Mr. President, if I could respond through the chair. Mr. President, I do have the privilege of serving on the Appropriations Committee, and I have seen the restrictions that we have put on funds over the years. One of those restrictions, which is at issue here, goes back 39 years. So it is not unusual for the Appropriations Committee to put certain limitations on the use of funds. And as I explained earlier, the Appropriations Committee also deals with non-tax dollars. It is not unusual for us to appropriate money that comes from the collection of fines, of fees, of penalties, from leases. This is common. So what we are proposing in this bill is not anything new, unusual, or unique. It would be part of the standard appropriations process. And indeed, Senator Cornyn actually raised the idea on the floor today of having the Victims Fund go through the appropriations process. We differ in language, so I don't want to imply that there is any endorsement, but the concept is one that the author of the bill has raised. So in response to my colleague from North Dakota, who has spoken so eloquently of her experience in dealing with the victims of human trafficking, I would assure her that as a member of the Appropriations Committee, I know full well that we put restrictions and limitations on funding as a standard course.
Mr. President?
Senator of North Dakota.
I would like to kind of have a moment where we think about this body and how impressed everybody throughout the country is, how proud they are of our system of government, how proud of the great decisions that were made in this room and the great deliberations and the great debates. This truly is a remarkable government, and it's a remarkable system. But it's always been remarkable because it's not just the wealthy and powerful that have a voice in this body. With us comes the opportunity to speak for the most disadvantaged Americans, the most disadvantaged people in our system. And I cannot imagine a more horrific life than the life of being sold into prostitution. I cannot imagine the more horrific life than being enslaved through the horrible, horrible events of human trafficking. Let's speak for those victims. Let's speak for those advocates who work so hard, who have been so encouraged that an issue like this becomes a priority issue for the United States of America. Let's try and bridge this gap. Let's work across the aisle. Let's reach to find a way forward, because these victims deserve our attention. They deserve this debate, and they deserve our voice. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield the floor.